us pray. O Lord, we give thanks as legislators for the rich diversity of our history. We welcome the many challenges of the present. We dedicate ourselves to both the present and the future as we join in the service of Alberta and Canada. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
Table with the Assembly 4 copies of the Provincial Senior Citizens Advisory Council report for the year 1988. Mr. Speaker, copies have been made available for all honorable members.
Minister of Culture, Multiculturalism.
Today, 4 copies of the annual report of the Alberta Art Foundation 87-88 and the annual report of the Alberta Library Board 87-88. I'd like to table them.
Member for Dunvegan.
Speaker, gives me pleasure to table Phase 1 report of the Municipal Statutes Review Committee on Municipal Government in Alberta.
Introduction of special guests.
The member for Clover Bar.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly 2 grade 6 classes from the Wynne Ferguson School. There are 22 students within each class. They are accompanied by their teacher, Debbie Orchard, and Laurie Christensen, and parents, Linda Ma and Elaine Bennett, as well as Hazel Ross, Mr. Speaker. I would ask that the students who are seated in the members' gallery, the teachers and parents rise and receive the traditional warm welcome of the honorable members of the Assembly.
Edmonton Mill Woods, followed by Rocky Mountain House.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to you and to the members of the Assembly this afternoon some 28 students from John Paul I School in the constituency of Edmonton Mill Woods. They're in the public gallery this afternoon with their teacher, Mrs. Ollie Waschuk, and their teacher aide, Mrs. Marilyn Orchard. I'd ask them now to stand and receive the very warm welcome of the House.
Member for Rocky Mountain House, followed by Drayton Valley.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce to you and to the members of this Assembly today a group of 44 grade 8 scholars from the David Thompson High School, accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Bill Foster, and one of the parents, Mrs. Margaret Davis. I would ask, they're seated in the speakers, or in the public and in the members gallery. I would ask them to now rise and let the Assembly give them the traditional warm welcome.
Drayton Valley.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce to you and through you to the members of this Assembly a group of students from the Kalmar School. There's 42 of them. They're seated in the public gallery, and they're accompanied today by their teachers, Jeanette Wilson and Lenora Papadopoulos. And I would ask that they rise and receive the traditional welcome of this House.
The member for Dunvegan.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me pleasure to introduce to you and through you members of the Municipal Statute Review Committee. They are seated in your gallery. They are Bob Matheson from Edmonton, Ross Alger from Calgary, Eric Musgrave, many of you know, that is a former MLA from Calgary-McKnight, Frank Lambright, Advisory Council member from the wonderful constituency of Dunvegan, Councillor Dick Papworth from the county of Lethbridge, and the Secretariat Coordinator Tom Forgraves. I ask them all to rise and receive the warm welcome of this assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, with this government's record of private labs, private nursing homes, and private hospital management, Albertans have come to not trust the government to keep health care in the public domain where it belongs. Even the Premier's comments yesterday revealed that further privatization of the health care system remains an option on the government's agenda, and Bill 5 sets the stage for the exercising of that option, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask the Premier if he'll explain why, in the two previous acts, the government could only transfer hospitals to hospital boards, while in Bill 5 the government can transfer hospitals and other health care facilities to, quote, any person or any organization. Could he explain that, Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Speaker, as I said yesterday to the honourable members and to the House, a piece of legislation that's been introduced into the House goes through the process of a first, second, and third reading and committee study. And, Mr. Speaker, as the Minister of Health said yesterday, she is looking forward to going through the legislation with the House, and I think that's the proper way to do it.
Hear, hear.
In other words, the Premier can't explain... Pardon me? Yes, a supplementary, Mr. Speaker. The bill is not on notice for debate today, so I would ask the Premier the supplementary question. If the Premier adopts the Minister's line on this bill that it's really only to transfer 3 specific facilities to local boards, then will the Premier explain why the bill doesn't specify those 3 specific facilities instead of allowing the wide open clause of selling or transferring to any person or any organization?
It's remarkable, Mr. Speaker. Now the honourable member wants to propose an amendment to the bill, and there will be a process where the member has that very right and can stand in her place. And I just find it strange, Mr. Speaker, the honourable members ask a question and then don't have the courtesy to sit and hear the answer. It's too bad, Mr. Speaker. They don't understand the rules of the House. But the bill has been presented. They can amend it if they like, and the House will decide.
Speaker, I'll tell you what the people of Alberta understand. They understand your agenda to privatize health care in Alberta.
Order, please. Order. We will have the supplementary question, and also there'll be no further interjections about whether or not it's an answer or not, according to Beauchesne. Supplementary, Edmonton Highlands.
Okay, we're used to it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will the Premier now agree to stop giving this wide-ranging, unusual, and unprecedented power to one single minister to sell, lease, or otherwise dispose of health care facilities in Alberta and commit himself to withdrawing the bill and rewriting it?
I'm sure, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is not listening to the answer, because the honourable member can make the proposal to the House when the bill is before the House, and we shall let the legislature decide. That's the way our democratic process works.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate that second question to the member for Edmonton Jasper Place.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since April of this year, the New Democrats have been arguing that federal intervention is the result of the refusal of this government to pull up its socks on the way it does environmental impact assessments. After 8 weeks of stonewalling, the minister comes back from Ottawa, and what does he announce? Federal review of natural resource projects. The Environment Ministry is in federal receivership in this province, Mr. Speaker. I want the minister to share his insight. What type of federal intervention are we facing in our province?
Mr. Speaker, I don't think that we're facing any kind of federal intervention. I think that what we're looking at is perhaps some kind of federal cooperation, federal participation, all nice words, all friendly words. And we welcome that. We welcome that kind of participation. We welcome that kind of cooperation. And we welcome the federal government to deal with those issues that are clearly under federal jurisdiction. Mr. Speaker, under no circumstances do we welcome federal jurisdiction into areas that are clearly provincial jurisdiction.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it seems to be that the minister has not explained what it is that he found out when he was in Ottawa. Will he please explain what type of a federal intervention or inquiry or whatever word he likes to use are we facing as a result of the announcement that he's made yesterday and again today?
Mr. Speaker, what was decided in Ottawa was simply a decision by the federal government to be communicated to the province soon as to how they would hope to participate in the provincial environmental impact assessment process.
Did the minister learn in Ottawa whether the federal government will do a study looking at the combined impact of all 7 projects, which is a clear and specific deficiency in the Alberta process?
The federal government, Mr. Speaker, made absolutely no reference to the process now being used by the provincial government. Their concern is exclusively related to those areas of jurisdiction that the federal government thinks they have some responsibility.
Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, in the budget address, one of the principles that the government indicated that it was about to pursue was the pursuit of cost effectiveness in government programs, albeit that the statement was wishy-washy. Mr. Speaker, it's shocking to note that the provincial treasurer, the deputy premier, and the forestry minister have collectively overspent their ministerial office budgets by nearly $750,000 in the last 9 years. Surely an indication that such efficiency requires auditing. My question to the Premier is this. Is the Premier aware that auditors general in Canada who use the operational efficiency audit system have proven that up to 10% can be saved by such audits on government operational costs?
Mr. Speaker, the government on a regular basis is consistently measuring and the programs which it provides to the people of Alberta to make sure that they are cost effective. I should point out to the honourable member that this government has the best record in Canada. Over the last 4 years, average year-over-year increase in program spending of 1.3%. There is no government in Canada has come close to that. Also point out, Mr. Speaker, that the government will continue to provide the best programs possible to the people of Alberta and maintain the lowest taxes in Canada.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, perhaps the Honourable Premier didn't understand the question. The question is he aware that using a plan, a known plan, a workable plan that's been developed by Auditors General in Canada, you can save up to 10% in operational costs? Is he aware of that plan and that ability to save money?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member may have some gimmick that he would like to follow through on. What we're going to do is the best job for the people of Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, inasmuch as the Premier doesn't know about how to save money, is he prepared to indicate to this Assembly what he'll do to keep the costs of the ministries that I talked about and other ministries under control?
Isn't it interesting, Mr. Speaker? The member, once again, when his base is weak, wants to try and raise his voice to give some credibility to his position.
Put his head in the rain barrel.
I would say, Mr. Speaker, that the government has proven over the years, and as I pointed out, over the last 4 years, an increase in program spending while inflation was far in excess of this, on average of 1.3%. Also, Mr. Speaker, you'd think the honourable member would know that it's managers who control spending, not auditors. You'd think the honourable member would have that kind of knowledge about how governments and business work.
That's right. Anoka Rimby, followed by Edmonton Centre, then Westlock Sturgeon.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to direct my question to the Minister of Advanced Education. As all members are aware, the allocations for post-secondary institutions in terms of funding have been announced. And it's apparent that the University of Alberta, at least the president of that institution, has concluded that this funding is inadequate. Some time ago, Mr. Speaker, the government received the recommendations of the Dupre report, which was intended to address the matter of alleged unfairness or inequity in the funding of post-secondary institutions across the province. My question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, have the recommendations of this report in fact been implemented?
Mr. Speaker, members may recall a year or two ago, the then Minister of Advanced Education was asked if he could work out some system of equity and fairness within the Alberta system. And a method of doing that that was acceptable to this government was to bring in someone from outside and analyze that. This was all done at the request of the University of Calgary. Dr. Dupre made a variety of recommendations, and all the recommendations that required funding were carried out, Mr. Speaker, in the past 12 months. So that has been done.
Well, supplementary then, Mr. Speaker, and more specifically, given that there appears to be a specific concern regarding the inadequacy of funding for equipment, modernizing equipment, renovations, and so forth. In fact, funding may be significantly less than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Can the Minister advise the House as to what the policy is with respect to the funding of the replacement of equipment and the providing of funding for renovations?
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker, and perhaps this arises from comments made by the President of the U of A yesterday. Alberta is the only province in Canada, Mr. Speaker, that has a program in place called a formula funding grant process that provides substantial funds for replacement of equipment, furniture, and renovations. The province has been, I think, very generous in the past several years with those funds. This year, the government has given a 5% increase, which to some people was not satisfactory, but we would hope and recognize, Mr. Speaker, that the institutions would do their best with those funds. This minister recognizes that the equipment becomes obsolescent and must be replaced, and we would hope, in spite of the, I think, generous 5% increase, to find ways in the future of increasing that.
Final supplementary, then, Mr. Speaker. I think the bottom line for everyone is the need for the assurance that qualified students will continue to have access to programs or to transfer programs to the University of Alberta. Can the Minister assure the House that this access of our post-secondary, qualified post-secondary students will continue without the imposition of tight quotas?
Well, Mr. Speaker, one has to recognize under the Universities Act, the universities are autonomous with regard to student enrollments. I would point out that the budget speech indicates that Alberta ranks first in all of Canada with post-secondary funding. We have in place, on the question of access, Mr. Speaker, a very exciting university transfer program whereby in our colleges, many of them provide the first and second year. I can assure honourable members of the House that as far as this government is concerned, any Albertan who has the ability and the desire to pursue post-secondary education There are spaces available in universities in this province. The only caveat I would put, Mr. Speaker, is that it may not always be at the university of one's choice.
Member for Edmonton Centre, followed by West Loch Sturgeon and Lesser Slave Lake.
Mr. Speaker, we New Democrats are committed to stopping this Private Hospital Act, just as we stopped the government's Private Health Care Insurance Act 2 years ago before it goes to second reading. And it is clear that in Bill 5, it is clear, though Marvin Moore isn't here today, it is clear that in Bill 5, the government is trying to give itself the power to transfer government health facilities to whomever it pleases. Now, the members of the government front bench like to often argue by saying that if it isn't broken, why fix it? So I'd like the Premier to explain today to the House what was so broken about the previous system that the government is now introducing sweeping changes in the way that it can sell off health care facilities.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the researchers of the NDP party end up bumping into each other and gave both members the same question or not. I would ask the honourable member to consult with his House leader so they get their questions straight. If the honourable member has a concern about the bill, raise it as the bill progresses through the House.
Our researchers... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our researchers did dig out what happened 2 years ago when you withdrew Bill 14, Mr. Speaker.
That's right.
So could the Premier's research department please get to work and provide an example of even one other Canadian province that has the gall to give itself such sweeping powers to sell off its health care facilities to any person or organization, either here or in the United States, for example?
Again, Mr. Speaker, I gather the honourable member is referring to a bill before the House, and I make him the offer to raise his concerns as the bill proceeds in the legislature. Agreed.
Mr. Speaker, this is urgent public business that this be dealt with before it goes any further. And the problem is, Mr. Speaker, will the Premier admit that it's his government's lack of a record that can be trusted which gives Albertans concern about whether it can be trusted with Bill 5 and its provisions, and do the honorable thing and instead withdraw it today before it goes to second reading?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the judgment about who the people of Alberta trusted has been made in the last election. And I might say, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable member has some concerns about a piece of legislation before the House. Like any other piece of legislation, he has a responsibility as that piece of legislation progresses to raise his concerns. See if he has the ability to carry the House, to carry the opinions of the members.
Yes, Honourable Premier, there's not much point going on if the chair can't even hear what's happening here. So if the other members are finished for a moment, perhaps the Premier could continue. Chair then recognizes West Loch Sturgeon, followed by Lesser Slave Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. My question's also to the... thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's also to the beleaguered Premier, but business is business, and we can't feel sorry, I guess. As we all know, the member for Stettler, Mr. Speaker, has made much of his newfound love for farmers, maybe even more so than his love for the Mulroney trade agreement, or for golf, for that matter. But the House will recall the Premier's statement, Mr. Speaker, last year, as promised to set up a committee to help educate and train farmers to take advantage of the supposed new huge markets in the U.S. In view of this promise, Mr. Speaker, how does the Premier reconcile a cut of 35% in agricultural research and a cut of 14% in product development for agricultural products with the fact that he was going to set up a committee to help invade the U.S. markets?
Increase the amount of love.
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Minister of Agriculture had his estimates before the House last night. The member had every opportunity to discuss the matter then.
Right. Coming or it's gone.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night it was hear no evil, speak no sense. But, Mr. Speaker, then what funds have been allocated? This is certainly not in the budget. to the much-promised transition committee to maintain some farmers' incomes until they adjust to the supposed new markets in the U.S.?
Again, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is asking details of a budget that was dealt with last night. The Minister of Agriculture may want to add to my comments, but the honourable member has every opportunity when estimates are up to raise those kind of detailed questions.
Part of your sleep.
Mr. Speaker, yes, selective amnesia, but let's go further. Forget funds. Has the Premier picked a chairman for the Transition Committee yet, or do all his neighbors have jobs?
I must say, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member once again has reduced his level in the House to that kind of comment, and I don't think it deserves the dignity of an answer.
Right. Member for Leicester-Slave Lake, followed by Calgary Mountain View.
Mr. Speaker, today the Department of National Defence announced the approval of low-level flight training routes in northern Alberta, one of two proposed. Could the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs advise this Assembly whether he or his department was consulted?
Mr. Speaker, there has been extensive consultation between the Government of Canada and the Government of Alberta and Saskatchewan and other governments affected by the decision today to announce these low-level tests, which will be carried out by North American Aerospace Defense Command, otherwise known as NORAD. And the route which has been approved, which impacts upon Alberta, was clearly outlined to our government and to the public some time ago. There has been extensive consultation on that matter, and the decision announced today by the Minister of National Defence is in keeping with that process of consultation, both with our government and with respect to environmental issues, and the study which was carried out by an independent consultant, which was made public in late in 1987.
Yes. Do we agree with these flight plans that are being proposed? I think you answered.
Speaker, we have, in the process of the consultation with the Department of National Defence, which, as I indicated, has been extensive and thorough, indicated our support for the program proposed by the Government of Canada, Department of National Defence, in keeping with our commitments for the defence of North America under NORAD. And yes, it's a short answer, but I think it does require that elaboration, that our government has felt that the federal government, Department of National Defence consultative process has been thorough and appropriate under the circumstances, and we believe that this is an appropriate method of dealing with this matter of crucial interest to the future defense of our country.
Do we have any assurances for the safety of of northern Albertans and for their property?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the opposition, particularly the member for Westlock Sturgeon, interjects some unintelligible comments. But the fact of the matter is that we have, as has best been described in an extensive amount of consultation, efforts have been made to make sure that the best possible safety which can be obtained and the elimination of flights over populated areas will be designed in order to take into consideration the concerns of people, both with respect to the protection of the citizens of our province and their property. And Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that this nation needs to be defended, whether the Liberal Party or the NDP Party want it or not.
Thank you. Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In early December of 1988, NBC Nightly News ran a nationally aired documentary exposing the involvement of a Mr. John Emer in an apparent confidence scheme to market a TV series on American POWs in Vietnam. We also know, Mr. Speaker, that same Mr. Emer was a key player in a now-defunct chess tournament planned for Calgary that received $100,000 from the Alberta Department of Tourism. Would the Minister of Tourism tell us today, given that this NBC documentary ran in early December of 1988 and the second advance of provincial funds was released in February of 1989, 2 months later, does it concern the Minister that his officials did not stop that payment or advise him that John Emer was the subject of this NBC expose?
Mr. Speaker, I think there's a few facts that should be on the record. Early in May of 1988, a proposal was sent to the City of Calgary and to this government. In July 19th of 88, City Council agreed to become a sponsor. The proponents of the World Blitz Tournament then came to us and sought provincial support, and we're going to also seek federal support. We met with them in late August, and in September gave them an indication that we would participate in principle. An agreement then was signed by the department after much discussion with them, I believe on October the 12th. The article you mentioned did cast aspersions on people that are not in this House and a U.S. citizen, and that did complicate their firm from receiving the necessary funding package that they were to come up with. It's unfortunate, Mr. Speaker, that at times within the House or by press articles like the member from Mountain View is talking about, it does cast aspersions on people that do cause projects some harm.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the question is whether the public can trust this minister in the department to exercise due care and diligence.
Order, please, honourable member. We're talking about trust and those kind of words again. We're taking them in the general sense, not specifically with regard to a particular member of this House. Rephrase.
We're aware of this documentary. Why did this department not move more quickly to protect the public funds entrusted to them?
Hear, hear.
Introduce a bill.
Mr. Speaker, as we stated earlier, that our agreement is a contract that was signed in October, and it had a payment due in April. Many meetings went on with the City of Calgary, the proponents, and after the Canadian Travelers Association was brought in February, and agreements were made with them to be the sponsors locally of the tournament. The second payment from this government, which was due by contract, was made on May 3rd, after much review by the department. And as I stated earlier, the press reports that cast aspersions on Mr. John Orr from the United States did cause Emma Controller a problem in raising the funds that they were supposed to produce, and that's because they couldn't produce those funds. Both ACT, the City of Calgary, and ourselves withdrew from the project.
Our money.
Well, Mr. Speaker, rather than blaming the media, will the minister clear the air and investigate why the alarm bells were not rung before May the 3rd, I understand from his comment, why the alarm bells were not rung earlier, and will he report back to the legislature on where the responsibility for this apparent misappropriation of money lies?
Right on.
As I stated in the legislature earlier in the week, Mr. Speaker, this whole matter has been discussed with the City of Calgary. They have got their lawyers working on the case, so we turned our files over to our lawyer for advice, and I think the staff of Alberta Tourism have to be commended. They did take due diligence all the way through the process. It's unfortunate that this could have been a very, very positive event for the city of Calgary. Many other events we've gone into, and there's a risk in each and every case, Mr. Speaker, and the several that I've been involved with, where funds of up to $150,000 have been spent. Like Celebrity Ski has brought this province about $7 to $8 million worth of advertising, and the one I guess this government is very proud of is the $1 million Alberta Tourism spent on the pre-opening ceremonies of Olympics, which brought some $54 million.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. That's a long way from this chess game. The Chair now recognizes Edmonton Meadowlark, followed by Smoky River.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the recent federal decision to undertake comprehensive environmental reviews of pulp mill and other major development projects in this province is, I believe, a clear indication of the inadequacy of this province's environmental impact assessment process. My question is to the Minister of the Environment. Will the Minister simply not agree that were his government doing environmental assessments properly, the federal government would have had no reason to move in and to do them for us?
Mr. Speaker, first of all, the federal government has never made a decision to exercise its environmental impact process in Alberta. As a matter of fact, they have indicated that where they have jurisdiction, they would like to participate and cooperate with Alberta, and the extent of that participation and that cooperation, Mr. Speaker, is being considered now by the federal government, and hopefully we will receive word from them, perhaps within the next week to 10 days, as to how they will participate and cooperate with us.
Let's go back at it again. Will the Minister please admit that if he had had the guts, the political determination to introduce proper environmental impact assessment legislation, we would not now be on the verge of losing provincial control over this very important jurisdiction over environmental policy in this province?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we're not on the verge of losing control over the environmental impact assessment process in this province. And the federal government has never indicated to us that our process is in any way deficient. All the federal government is saying is that there might be some matters over which they feel they have jurisdiction, and if in fact they do, they would like to have a say in the process. It's as simple as that. So simple that the honourable member from Meadowlark should be able to understand it.
Too simple for you. I think it's pretty clear they gave the Alberta government, the benefit of the doubt up to this point. Now they can't even trust this government to do it right. Yeah. To the Premier, can the Premier confirm that losing control of environmental policy in this important area to the federal government is just another example of how poorly he and his government conducts, negotiates our interests in the federal-provincial relations arena?
Beach Lake all over again.
Mr. Speaker, it is true that we know both the Liberal Party and the NDP Party have always wanted to conduct a course of policy that would provide greater and greater federal control of matters. That's along the socialistic style of their centralist style of their political beliefs. However, Mr. Speaker, the government of Alberta has fought for the rights of this province, will continue to do so in the future. Those matters that are provincial jurisdiction will remain that way. There are some areas involving fisheries and navigable waters that the federal government wants to cooperate, as the Honourable Minister has pointed out, but we are not going to follow the wishes and desires of the NDP Party and the Liberal Party, who would want to centralize things in the federal system, Mr. Speaker. We will fight for Albertans on provincial jurisdiction.
Smoky River, followed by Edmonton Strathcona.
We continually hear about the mega projects, Mr. Speaker, that are being developed in Alberta, from tar sands to heavy oil upgraders to big-ticket forestry items. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Could the Minister please indicate what, if anything, is being done to assist the hundreds of smaller rural centres in Alberta to take advantage of the spin-offs which might be available in conjunction with or a result of the current strong economic growth in our province today?
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to indicate to the honourable member that tomorrow I'll have an opportunity to release details of a program that was announced both in the speech from the throne and in the budget as it relates to smaller communities within the province of Alberta. We are coming forward with a community business development program to help areas such as the honourable member has just lobbied for.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister inform the Assembly whether the announcement he referred to will be swallowed up by the major centres, or is the new program going to be targeted to cities, towns and villages of certain population?
Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to share with the honourable member that it will be geared to those communities within the province of Alberta with a population base of less than 10,000 people, and they can use this funding for accessing either technical or support services as they see fit so that they can develop an appropriate business development plan of their own, thus sustaining the economic growth within this great province of ours.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister confirm whether this will be a one-time deal or an ongoing development program for our thriving smaller centres which don't have the tax base to hire full-time economic development officers?
Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to indicate to the honourable member that those smaller communities can access this funding whether they wish to develop a business development plan or use it for support services or to provide promotional material advocating the assets of their specific locality. I should indicate to the honourable member that it is a pilot project. We're looking for input from members such as the honourable member from Smoky River so that we can assess the value of this program. We believe it is going to be very worthwhile, but we wish to have his input as to the success over the period of this next year.
Thank you. Edmonton Strathcona, followed by Calgary Northwest.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Advanced Education and takes up where the question from the Honourable Member for Ponoka, Rimby, which was by way of a preemptive strike, very wisely left off. And my question, Mr. Speaker, concerns the draconian cuts that the President of the University referred to last night, and before him, the Chairman of the Board of Governors of the University referred to in speeches of unprecedented fierceness about those cuts imposed on them by the University. And left President Horowitz saying that he was resigning from his post with a cry of disappointment. My question is, can the Minister justify for us the level of funding for all post-secondary education in this province, which is less than the amount of concessions to the oil companies in any of the last few years?
That's right.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know where the honourable member for Strathcona gets his term draconian, unless it's from today's Edmonton Journal, which I have in front of me. I would point out, Mr. Speaker, that the budget of Thursday last, Mr. Speaker, made an appropriation of an increase of 8% to the post-secondary system in Alberta, and the post-secondary system of Alberta and the University of Alberta, which the honourable member, I presume, is basing his comments on, had a 6.9% increase, which, quite frankly, in the judgment of government, was adequate for the University of Alberta to continue its operations for the year 1989-90.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister boasts of the unique program of formula funding. My question is, how can we trust a government that alleges there is a formula to replace equipment and renovate buildings when, in the case of the grant this year, in respect of the University of Alberta, it is insufficient to meet the needs of a single faculty, the Faculty of Science, let alone the whole university?
Mr. Speaker, most other provinces have to meet within their operating budgets the very formula funding question that the honourable member refers to. In this year's budget, there's some $34 million provided to the post-secondary system in this province, an increase of 5% over last year. I conceded a few moments ago in the previous question that equipment wears out, and as an advocate for the system, I would do what I could to see that those funds are increased in future. However, that is not, Mr. Speaker, a commitment that I can fulfill. It's one that the government will consider carefully. I would point out, in summary, that most other provinces would love to be in the very envious position of the post-secondary institutions in this province.
Well, again, as a final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, perhaps the Minister can explain how we can reasonably trust a government that promises matching grants to dollar for dollar to donations to universities, to their endowment funds, when the allocation to the University of Alberta this year is $2.4 million against an annual donation stream currently of $10 million.
Mr. Speaker, this government recognized back in 1980 the great opportunity there was by creating an endowment fund whereby institutions could go out throughout the province and seek private contributions to their institution. They were matched by this government. The success of that is self-evident. The 10-year program ran out. The $80 million, Mr. Speaker, ran out in 5 years. A new program was brought in to show the enthusiasm. It only lasted about 3 years, and as I recall, and members will be called upon to pass special warrants that were passed a year ago for about $48 million. Last week, the government, in the budget speech, announced a new program of some $80 million. Now, the honourable member is not quite correct, and I hesitate ever to be critical of a lawyer who may be incorrect. I would point out that the U of A, Mr. Speaker, has been very successful in its fundraising, raising over $8 million a year in the past years. However, as this government and this minister feels very strong, Mr. Speaker, and this is a very important point, there is more to this province than the University of Alberta and the University of Calgary. We have some 29 institutions, and this minister is convinced the program called the Endowment Incentive Fund is a success story, and all institutions should have access to it. That is why, Mr.
Thank
Speaker...
you, Honourable Minister. Order, please. Calgary Northwest, followed by Grand Prairie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is now becoming apparent that the federal Conservative Party is in the imminent process of making a decision to allow passenger service in Canada to shut down, passenger rail service. And the loss of tourism to Alberta would be quite significant if Via Rail were shut down. By waiting for the federal government to take action, this government shows a lack of concern for Albertans. My question is to the Minister of Economic Development and Trade. Will the Minister provide leadership to bring together municipalities, chambers of commerce, and other interest groups along both Via Rail lines to launch an effective campaign to stop the federal government from breaking its promise to Western Canada?
Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to reinforce what I indicated in this Legislative Assembly last week and indicate my delight that finally this serious issue is being brought forward by the Liberal Party, which has been silent up until now, but to underscore what I indicated to an honourable member last week in this chamber, whereby we have made strong representation to the federal government and are going to continue with that strong representation to the extent that we also wish to have the costing figures, and we are requesting them from the federal government. To date, I have not heard back from the federal minister, but I have raised it by a number of ways to the federal minister responsible, plus his associates from the province of Alberta.
Will the minister agree to establish a special committee of this legislative assembly to assist in the development of a strategy to retain Via Rail?
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, we already have a committee in place, an interdepartmental committee of ministers and departmental officials, whereby we are working to ensure that we do maintain what we consider a very essential service.
My third question is directed towards the Premier. Since the Premier only moments ago said that he was so strong in maintaining Alberta initiatives rather than central government initiatives, why has this government not initiated a provincial study to examine the costs that Via Rail will have in the province, rather than waiting for the central government in Ottawa to provide the costs, as the Minister of Economic Development has just indicated? Why don't we do that here and now?
The honourable member's information is so incorrect. The government carried out such a study already.
Orders of the day. Might we have unanimous? Might we have unanimous?